Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Discussing Effective Engineering webinar. We are live right now. People are going to be trickling in while I'm giving this intro, but I just wanted to go over a bit about who we are and kind of how this webinar is going to go ahead. So I am Jamie, and I'm on the marketing team here at Evolution. And today we just wanted to have a very open discussion, roundtable format about effective engineering leadership. On the right-hand side, you should see a few different panels. There's a chat panel where everyone can kind of add their information and add their opinions on the discussion. There's a question panel where we're going to be posing a few questions to you guys. And there's also a polls panel where we're going to be putting in polls for you guys to vote on. The first question that we wanted to pop in was just a general one, who you are. So just tell us a bit about yourself, and that would be great. But for now, we're going to throw it over to our panel, who are going to be building the questions today. And we're going to do a few intros. So could we start with you, Matthew, please?
Sure. G'day, everyone. My name's Matt Sinclair, and I'm partner and VP of Engineering at BCG Digital Ventures here in London. Bit of background, I've been building software in one form or another for about 26 years now, I think, roughly. I've built everything from a flight simulator in Singapore back in the mid-90s through to haute couture, fashion, e-commerce, and everything in between. I spent most of my career down in Australia, involved in a few startups. A couple I started myself, which were complete disasters, and one or two where I was an early stage employee that went on to be a bit more successful. I've got a background in payments, high performance mission critical systems, so the sort of stuff that runs the back end of the payment system. So spent a lot of time in financial services. Since moving to the UK 5 years ago, I've been leading the engineering team here at DV in London, and we've built about, I think, about 30 or 35 ventures, I think, since in that time. And like I said, everything from haute couture fashion to cement delivery, and pretty much everything in between. These days, I refer to myself as principal of CTO school, jokingly, and what I mean by that is that I run a team of venture CTOs, basically, my job is to get the crap out of the way so that the venture CTOs can do their best work. And I'm happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Melanie, could we go to you next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Mel Yenkin, and in my current role, I'm leading the design team who work on a product called Google My Business within Google, spread across London and the US. And it's basically a tool that allows businesses to get a presence on Google Search and Maps. And I've been at Google for the last 2 years. And my specialty is leading user experience teams and kind of working with other, engineering and product partners to like holistically lead those initiatives cross-functionally. Before Google, I've worked at a few startups, a few agencies. I worked at eBay for a little while. Probably detect the Australian accent here. It's surprising that you would have both Matt and me, two Australians, on the call in one go. But yeah, we do love London. So I moved over to the UK about 8 years ago. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Mel. And Usman?
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for joining today. So I'm Usman Hamid. In my current role, I'm currently lead CTO, leading infrastructure, strategy and architecture for Barclays. It's a slightly different role to both Melanie and Matt in the fact that it's very traditional infrastructure orientated. However, with the adoption of public cloud, most of my time is spent on driving automation and software-defined infrastructure into the environment. So the concept of engineering is starting to become more and more important for us as we start to become more agile and focus on things like self-service and creating more automated workflows. Prior to that, I was at the BBC doing a similar role, focused on product engineering, so all things cloud and SaaS, basically. Unlike Melanie and Matt, I'm kind of UK based, so I'm not from Australia. But yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Thanks. So we've got a very mixed range of experiences there, so that's great. So we're hoping this is going to be a very well-rounded discussion on engineering leadership and technology leadership as well, by extension. So we're going to just get stuck into the questions now. So the first question, all these questions have been gathered throughout our community. So we've put it out to our candidate community, and they've come back to us with these questions. So the first one is around designing team structures. So how important is it to get that right? Sometimes you might adopt a team. Sometimes you might have the opportunity to kind of build that yourself. And just your thoughts and opinions on what good looks like from a team structure perspective, and how you kind of how you plan on designing that. So could we go to you first, Osman?
Sure, I'll just tell myself off mute. So yeah, it's an interesting one. So I was thinking about this, and I think as I was going through my thought process in terms of how to answer this question, I think it came back to looking at myself and taking a view in terms of understanding what my own limitations are first and foremost. Because I think part of creating a credible team around you is understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, and then try to understand what kind of gaps you have that you need to fill with credible people around you, so that you can be successful, basically. So I think that's kind of like the first thing that I would say is, understand your own limitations and what you need to focus on to be successful in your own role, and then based on that, you can start to build that credible team around you that can support you in helping to achieve those goals, and maybe take away some of the pressure, and actually be accountable for their own specific deliverables, basically. Ultimately structures can vary, based on role, scope, the type of organization you're in, but, having that kind of inward look at yourself and then conducting that capability assessment, in terms of whether you adopted a team or what your kind of gaps are, I think for me are kind of, the first things that you should look to do as you start to find out more about the individuals that you've got at your disposal. And then from there, you can start to look at, what the right mix and blend of skills and people are that you need to be able to create that kind of, team that can execute for you.
Excellent, thank you. Melanie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been through so many reorganizations in my time. It's kind of crazy. Already a few at Google, and I think the reality is that no organizational design is perfect, but there are some good principles that you can kind of work by. I used to believe that there was like a very set way that you would have to set up UX and design within engineering organizations for it to be successful, but really it needs to be individualized to the organization. And when I look at the team design and the setup, I love the principle of Conway's law to kind of keep in mind that any organizational design that you create will end up being mirrored in the product or the system that team is actually building. And there's an interesting Conway's, the actual thing is that any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organizational's communication structure. And I've seen that in so many of the products that I've worked in, like the silos that exist in the team exist then in the product itself. And that can be in how the APIs speak to each other, or it can be in terms of what the actual interface is that users are seeing. So I think keeping that in mind when you're designing the team structure is really important. Like, what experience are you actually trying to create? And then from a design perspective, I really push for UXs to be embedded with their cross-functional peers. So, to like set up a team of cross-functional people who are fully allocated to work on their problem space, and kind of giving them a problem space to own and that they're kind of responsible for, rather than like a feature they have to ship. And kind of saying to them, you need to solve this problem and we're going to measure it in this way. And then now you have the autonomy to iterate and really figure out like what is the end solution that we need to create, rather than just shipping the thing that, leadership is telling them to. And that's how I've seen teams be more successful, is when they've got the right people they need together in the room with the right space to actually have ownership over the thing that they're delivering, and the right process in place so that they can fail in a safe way. So it's okay for them to experiment and iterate and say, if something is, not the right approach and it's not going to actually help them achieve their end goal and solve that initial problem, then it's fine for them to pivot and do something else.
Definitely, yeah, that kind of like psychological safety to go out there and explore. Matthew, we'll come to you now.
Yeah, look, a lot of that is music to my ears, actually. So I've got a strange answer to this question, because I have two quite different things going on at TV. The first one is I've got a team that is my engineering team, the engineering cohort. But then what we have to do is put ventures together, and those ventures draw on people from 5 or 6 different cohorts. So there's sort of two different ways to think about it, if you like. And so on one level, we have a pretty standard, professional services, multidisciplinary team structure: associate, senior, leader, director, etc. But then what we do is we sort of put a team together that's specific for ventures. So one of my directors, Paul Slattery, he refers to this as casting, which I really like, as opposed to staffing. You try and find the best people that have the best casting for the role that they're going to be playing. And then, in terms of a venture structure, we have a role we call venture CTO, and then underneath that, it's basically 2 front end, 2 back end, and then combinations of specialists as needed. But because of what we're doing very early stage startups most of the time. You can actually do an awful lot with a really small team, because particularly if you're operating in a completely standalone venture, like outside the corporate firewall for the client, you really have an awful lot of freedom. When you're inside the firewall, it's a bit different. Sometimes there's some other constraints that come into play, and you need more structure to it. But I really liked what you said, Melanie, about no one structure. What we do is we give. We try to, at least. We don't always succeed here, but we try to give really a lot of agency to the venture CTO and the team to make up the structure that suits them the best. And I think we'll probably talk about this a bit later on, but what I want to do is just sort of get out of the way and let the team treat it as if it's their own business, and let them create the structure that best suits them. And we've got a bit of luxury in that we do this a lot, and so we've got quite a bit of scar tissue from all the times we've failed to get it right. And so whereas a new team, if it was just a garage startup, in the garage, there'd be a lot of work to get the right structure going. Our folks typically will be doing 1 or 2, maybe even 3 ventures a year. So they're able to really hit it and get that structure that suits them quite quickly, which I think is pretty unique. The other thing that we do, if we've got a bit more time on this one, is that we have streams. So we've got the levels, but we also have streams. And so we have creative engineer, venture CTO, deep tech expert, and more recently we've introduced a solution expert. And so what we try to get folks to do is pick a major, something that they're going to concentrate on, but then to have at least one minor. And so a creative engineer is sort of at the front end of stuff. They're doing innovation type work, typically consulting into innovation, whereas a venture CTO would be in incubation. When you actually get down to building something, they're acting like a traditional CTO in a startup. And then the DT and the SC, they're more consulting roles. So the deep tech expert knows some deep practical experience about a deep technology, can consult into either innovation or incubation, and the solution experts are there to help us work with clients. More enterprise, I call big E enterprise, right, where you need some of those other governance processes have to come into play. I think that's probably enough on that.
Cool. Well, this initial discussion has spawned off a few questions. One of them that I think comes off that quite naturally, which has come from Andy Norton. This question is, what has worked well for you all when you need to bring people along with you on new initiatives, like training, for example, and create engagement and involvement with people within your disciplines? So does anyone want to take a stab at that first? Melanie?
Yep, I can jump in. So I think this is saying specific initiatives like training. I can speak more to new initiatives like product change initiatives that we've had. The best way that we've kind of proven to bring people along comes down to the basics of working with people, is like having enough time together to actually, discuss what the initiative is and to really understand like the why behind it. I think if we just say, oh, we need you to go and complete X, it's going to be very unlikely that someone is going to feel motivated to go and do it. So when we've rolled out new initiatives, we've met with each of the groups, whether it's a certain discipline or a certain person who's responsible for a certain area, and try to think about tailoring the message. So it's like, we want you to do X because it's going to help you as an individual person achieve a certain result, which is important for you as a person, not a generic message for everyone around, oh, this is good for us as a business. Because ultimately people are pretty self-centered. It's just human nature. And so having some kind of message which is like, this is important for your individual role or your team and will provide you with a certain benefit has been the main way that we've had success in getting people to actually get involved and care about it, because they can clearly understand what it's going to deliver for them if they go and do that thing. Top-down mandates tend to massively fail without any clear benefit described.
Brilliant, thank you. Usman, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the comments that Melanie's made, I think, ultimately it's trying to determine the value of what you're doing and how important it can bring to the firm that you're in right now. I think a lot of the times we tend to focus on things like Melanie said, and it's kind of a very task orientated without any kind of tangible value to the firm at the end of it. So I think having
I think we may have just lost Usman a bit there. Matthew, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, let's rescue. So this is a tricky one. I'll tell you how I feel about training. And so from my point of view, I find that the best way to learn something is to get in and do it. And the folks at DV that we have on our team, they're all pretty much like that. And so what we try and do is get them operating in an environment with some good some folks who know what they're doing, and then they can model their behavior on what they're seeing. And I think that in my career, that's been the thing that's been the most beneficial for me in terms of training. Like I worked at a couple of really great companies back in Sydney where the folks that I was a junior there, and the senior folks had gone on to do some amazing things subsequently. And I just feel really blessed actually that I was able to spend some time with them. So I've tried to recreate that in our teams, trying to get we spend a lot of time with our associates, and I was going to talk about this a bit later on, but I'm a big believer in promoting from within, right? And so we spend a lot of time with associates, getting associates to come in, and folks who might not otherwise be traditional and have a traditional engineering background. We've had really great success with career changers who've gone to coding schools. So they're well educated and qualified and experienced people, but they've had a career change and decided that they wanted to be programmers. And we've had some fantastic success stories with pushing those people through by giving them the opportunity to work alongside really, really good people. And I think that's just absolutely the best training. More formal training, we have it and we do it. And I must admit, some of it's been fantastic, particularly coaching type training that we've done has been absolutely brilliant. It's because a lot of that stuff isn't necessarily stuff that you can work out for yourself. Sometimes there's I think programming and engineering, you can, sitting alongside someone doing good work, it rubs off on you. But I think coaching is one particular case, and some aspects of leadership as well. They're not intuitive, or they don't have intuitive. It's hard to find an intuitive access to it. And so coaching, I know myself again, has been brilliant. Coach to coach type training has been absolutely brilliant. So we spend a lot of time with coaching and 360. Well, we'll get onto that topic as well later on, but spend a lot of time on feedback at DV and BCG in general. So it's something we spend an inordinate amount of effort on.
Brilliant.
So yeah, I would echo what Melanie said about getting people on board. I think particularly with smart people, you'll probably hear me say this again and again, but as soon as you take agency away from people, they start to disengage. And so if you just go out and tell people something directly, they tend to not be as excited about it as if you leave a bit of white space for them to work out what to do. And I really I index very heavily on leaving some space for people to do some creative thinking and tell me what they're going to do rather than the other way around.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Andy. Hopefully that's been well and truly covered for you. We've had another question that's come in, which I think potentially could be quite a quick fire one. So this one has come from John Cross, and he's asked the metrics that you choose will, whether you mean them to or not, set the focus of your teams. If you could choose only one metric for a team to report on, what would that be? Usman, could we come to you first on that one?
Apologies about that. My internet has decided to die, so I'm on the 5G modem right now. Here's tech in action, right?
No worries.
So yeah, the question was metrics you choose. So I think this is a bit of an interesting one for me because I think certainly in the field that I work, I think metrics for me can sometimes distract teams. I think that this is my personal view anyway, and I think they can become distracting things, which mean that we tend to lose focus and we start to chase numbers rather than experiences, or doing the right thing sometimes. So for me, if metrics are important to you in your organization, choose the ones that have got, again, the most value from a business perspective, where you can demonstrate progress, and just don't have them as arbitrary things that you need to hit, I think. So that's kind of my very simplistic view of how I would use metrics basically within my day-to-day. I'm not saying they're not important, but I think they have to be right in terms of what you're trying to achieve, really. And sometimes they can be distracted, and we've all seen the famous project reports where everything's green, for example, and it kind of means very little. So I'm not a huge fan of getting into the kind of the actual myriad of like metrics. That's my personal view anyway.
Melanie, what are your thoughts on metrics?
So I think ideally I like the team to think about who the customer is and then design an engagement metric that's the best metric for that customer. But I think you have to be very careful about what you choose, because it does drive behavior and decision making, and it's very hard to unpick. And at Google, we're super metric driven and result driven. So there's a lot of time spent designing the metrics themselves, but I always, at being a UXer, like to choose the perfect engagement metric for a customer. So that could be, 28 daily active usage for something. How often, how many of our customers are coming back to the product every 28 days or every 7 days, or, even every day, depends on the product that you're designing.
Brilliant. And Matthew, any closing thoughts on that one?
Yeah, look, I'm probably going to argue both sides of this. I like what has been said. Actually, it's interesting because as I was preparing for this, I was thinking, what do I think about metrics? But so let me start out. One of the things that I look for when we're hiring, particularly the venture CTOs or putting people into that role, is, are they the kind of person that goes hunting for signals, right? And you really want to be signal driven, because the one metric that really means the most in our business is product market fit. Has the venture achieved product market fit? And it's sort of binary. It either has or it hasn't. And then interestingly, it's not enough, right? So product market fit is one thing, but then you want to scale the business to get profitable product market fit. So at the very top level, and this is even in engineering, this is not just the product thing, this is in engineering, we are just really driven by product market fit. And so then the question is, okay, well, we've designed this new business. What signals am I going to go hunting for that will give me some idea about whether or not we're actually getting somewhere near product market fit? And so I really appreciate what Usman said there about, there's a lot of vanity metrics, and then you end up, to misquote Bezos, you sort of chase the metric and not the thing that the metric's trying to represent, right? And I think that's a terrible thing. You see this, unfortunately, in some sort of operational components of businesses. There's a lot of work that goes into these processes, and you stand back and, like timesheets is a great example, right? There's so much work goes into timesheets in businesses, and you think, I'm a fixed cost to the business, basically. Why do I have to fill out a timesheet? Anyway, I'm getting off track slightly, but so I make sure I look for folks who go chasing signals. And what I want them to look for, though, as well, is, not vanity metrics, and also not purely technical indicators. I want them to think about people, process, and technology. And so I want them to have a bit of a balance of the things that they're looking for. And I appreciate what Melanie said about ultimately, what does the user think here, right? Like, what I think is pretty much irrelevant, right? What does the user think? Are users coming back to the site? Are they engaged? Those kind of things. They're much more valuable metrics than weird sort of internal process metrics that can just create noise.
Brilliant. We've had we're getting lots of questions through now. We've had one specifically addressed to you, Matthew. So as you mentioned that you deal with various ventures at the same time, what advice would you give to a B2B SaaS startup for managing custom development requests from clients alongside not compromising that progress on the core product development at the same time? So I'm just going to post that in the chat as well, because I appreciate that's quite a long question.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Look, I'll do my best to answer it, but I'll say from the outset, I'm not sure I have a good answer for you. We've got one venture at the moment, which I'll just remain nameless for a sec, but it is exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. It's a pretty high tech venture. It's got a lot of really quite deep technical things going on with it, and they have a very small number of very big customers, and those customers, 2 or 3 customers, are sort of dragging them in different directions with custom feature requests. And so they're basically I'm mentoring or coaching the CTO at the moment, and we're having this conversation, and he asked me more or less the same question, how do we cope with this? And so the one bit of advice that I gave him, and it's far from perfect, but this is how we thought about it, was we came up with this concept called white label zero. All right. And what I mean, I've used this in a few different contexts, but what I mean by that is that imagine you have an ideal customer and build your version for that. Okay. And then all these feature requests can go into customized versions if you need to in the short term for each of your other additional customers. But make sure you've got an ideal customer that's driving the product in the direction that you want it to go in. Otherwise, you're just going to get pulled from pillar to post, and you'll end up being all things to everyone, which ends up being nothing to everyone. And I know it's not a great answer. I'm really sorry, but this is a really, really hard question actually, and it comes up a lot in SaaS businesses. How to avoid being pulled backwards and forwards. And I don't know. I really can't think of anything other than what I've suggested. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's brilliant. Obviously, we are in the session right now, we're trying to answer as many questions as possible, but we do obviously have the platform to revisit these questions in the future. So nothing is lost here. But yeah, I appreciate that, Matthew. Thank you. We've had another question through, which I'm going to throw out, which is about managing innovation. So how do you manage innovation, especially when 1, managers' behavior is overly conservative, and 2, devs and engineers want to apply tech because it's cutting edge without considering user experience? So can we start with you, Melanie, considering it's in your wheelhouse?
Big question. Big question. How much time do we have? How do you manage innovation? So I guess it depends on I honestly feel like this is almost the same answer to the first question that we had, which is like, how do you structure the team? Because I feel like if you have the right people and the right functions together with the right purpose established for that group, then they will, and that they also have the right space to fail, and to see those as learnings, then you'll have an environment where innovation will occur. I think in the specific part of the question there, which was talking about engineers wanting to use technology and not necessarily considering user experience, if you have a team who are fully allocated with all those functions represented, those kinds of questions would happen, and you would have a healthy debate within the team. And you would ultimately have that team orient towards choosing the solution that makes the most sense for the end user. And the UXer would be able to say, let's go and test this, let's go out into the wild, and let's actually see whether that proposed prototype or solution will actually make any change, and benefit the problem that user is trying to solve for. And to basically decide things that way, rather than trying to decide as an internal debate. So yeah, it's kind of a long-winded setup, but yeah, basically, if you get the team together and you give them the space to have ownership over a certain problem that they're trying to solve, I do think that's how you make innovation occur. And I'll hand over to the others now.
Sure. So, Usman, do you have any thoughts on managing innovation when specifically organizations may be overly conservative?
It's quite a difficult one, because I think there's a fine line here between wanting to progress the capability of the org against, I guess, some of the commercial pressures that you might be under, or kind of as a kind of organization. But I think without innovation, then you can never move forward, really. Ultimately, I think, as much as there's going to be obstacles and there'll be issues that you have to kind of overcome, but I think it's hugely important you kind of harvest that innovation, either whether it's through dedicated hackathon days or something of that kind of sort, where you're bringing different thinking to the table, and out of those kind of days, you may get something that's got real value to the business that might take it to the next level or introduce a new kind of product feature or concept into your kind of offering, really. So I think it should be encouraged, and I think it should be actively encouraged within your team, because ultimately it's what ultimately keeps, for me, people within organizations, and actually keeps them interested, because as soon as you start to lose some of that, people will then start to look elsewhere for different challenges.
This is a question that's really close to my heart, because we do this every day. Clients come to us and ask us that, this more or less the same question. And I let me say two things. So the first thing that enterprises suffer from is fear of failure. Big enterprises, fear of failure. It's often a lot easier just to do nothing rather than do something and risk failure, because then someone can point at you or point at that thing and say that it failed. And we see that a lot. And so and also big organizations are marvelous at mustering innovation antibodies. All right, and an innovation antibody are these sort of organizational tendrils that emerge when anyone tries to change something. And in particularly big organizations, they're big because they've been successful at doing the things they've always done. And so these antibodies aren't actually, they're not irrational or evil. They're sort of rational in many ways, because you look at it and you think, okay, this business, what we want to do here is make sure we don't screw with anything. Otherwise we're going to do something wrong with the customers or the revenue or whatever. And so it's sort of in a weird way, it's rational behavior to muster these antibodies against it. And so one of the things that we really, really focus on at DV is this failure tolerance. And celebration of failure even. And the product VP product here, Dan Cohen in London, he has this great saying, which is, there's no such thing as failure, there's only validated learning. And he says it all the time. And so I think that one of the tricks to at least to enterprise innovation is getting a tolerance and a resilience to failure, celebrating it, and being ready for it. And then the other thing, just on the specific tech question that you mentioned, because we have this as well, we do a bit of entry filtering on that when we're hiring people. We're very clear to them that DV is about building things, finding product market fit, building ventures. It's not about building the next bit of GWiz technology for the sake of it. And so we sort of look for that on the way in, and often we're looking for people who want to build things, not just people who want to play around with the tech. And so we're a bit lucky in that sense that we've been able to filter out some folks who might be better off tinkering on open source projects, or pushing the boundaries of tech rather than, or doing research. Some like a Google, for example, has got plenty of opportunities to do research into these things, or even some big enterprises have those divisions that allow that to happen. But we're very much focused on building something concrete, and we do some entry selection to make sure people stick with that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for the question, Marcus. Hopefully there's a lot to think about there. Going on to the next question now. So this one's about building influence across the organization. So other than, just doing a great job, do you guys have any tried and tested strategies or methodologies for kind of spreading your influence across the organization? Could we start with you, please, Usman?
Yeah, again, I think a huge part of this comes down to credibility. And I think, as kind of, leaders of large engineering teams, people look to you to kind of make those kind of, credible decisions that are going to, give back some value to the organization, really. So I think it's able to influence and having the platform and the stage to have those kind of conversations, because without that credibility, you're not going to get your foot in the door, so to speak, or you're not going to be taken seriously. So I think credibility is a huge part. And then I think after that, it's more around, I think Melanie touched on it before, maybe Matt as well. It comes down to how you kind of come across in your, how you kind of interface with people, how you treat people with respect and, trust. So there's a lot of personal aspects that are kind of not taught, really, to be quite honest, which you either, I think personally, you either learn the hard way, like through learn experiences, or you're kind of naturally gifted in being quite people-centric, and you have a natural flair for getting people on side. So I think we've all come across, great leaders in the past, from big tech companies like Apple or kind of Microsoft, where, people have a certain amount of gravitas and they're able to command, conversation. So I think there's two parts to it for me. There's the the actual being credible is hugely important, but then the more important thing is how you actually treat people, how you interface with people, to kind of, you know, bring people along that journey with you, and to get that kind of consensus that we're heading in the right direction, and that's all down to people skills.
Do you think people, like the new leaders especially, kind of overthink that? Maybe they're kind of in that position, and it's almost back to basics, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, and it'd be good to get, you know, Matt and Melanie's perspective on this. But, you know, I think when people make that step into, you know, becoming a leader, you have to realize that you have to let go of a lot of the things that you used to kind of do before. Like, I mean, we call it micromanagement, but it's that kind of, you can't be so microscopic anymore as you were before, because you've got different aspects to your role that you need to think about, which is how we develop people, how we create a great culture. So there's all these other things that kind of come that become equally important. And, you know, I've always taken the people side of things very, very seriously as I've kind of progressed, because I think ultimately that's where a lot of your success comes from. It's not about you as an individual. We're merely just custodians of all these people, and we're trying to get them to do the best work in the environments that we kind of work in. So it's hugely important that we empower them, make them accountable for things, and, you know, make sure that they've got a way to shape the kind of the work that they're doing. So yeah, I mean, we can all get lost in metrics and KPIs and, you know, budgets and things like that, and that's kind of the mechanics of the machines that we're working. But, you know, ultimately, getting the best out of people and actually developing talent is something that can't be overlooked.
Thank you, Melanie. Do you want to add to that on building your influence across the organization?
Yes, I think I can only really underscore. I think the big piece from what Usman said there is around people, like how you actually have the relationship with someone to actually influence them. So like the way I describe it to people in my team when I'm coaching them on it is to think about all the meetings you need to have before the meeting where the decision happens. Like, who do you need to be speaking to answer individual questions with, or building rapport with, so that when you get into that actual forum, that they are already on side to like what's being proposed, because the chances of something being successful, it's a radically new concept or something like that within a meeting, is quite low if people haven't already been brought along for the journey. So that can be like for an individual decision, but like personally, I actually track my stakeholder maps for like all the people who are going to be important stakeholders for me, who would be my reviewers, and I revisit that every couple of months, and I kind of rate my relationships with each of those people. I note how often am I meeting with them, what are those forums, what comments do I have about, like, do they need to build more rapport or not? And it's like essential to success within the organization. It depends on which org you're in, but within Google, it's very much related on how your peers are viewing you and rating you. So like making sure that you have a really good relationship with your stakeholders, so that when it comes to actually making decisions and influencing them, you can rely on the trust and rapport that you've already built, is kind of key. But there's not much else to add. I think Usman, you had a great answer there.
No, brilliant. Matthew, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, when you sent this question across, I thought about it slightly differently, and I was thinking, answering directly, is it possible to resolve relationship issues within your team as a manager? And the first thing I thought of was, well, you have to assume that's true, right? If you didn't, then I think you're probably missing a beat as a manager, as a leader. And then the thing that flowed on from that for me was this sort of idea of friendship at work and how complicated it can be, and particularly in a leadership role. It's quite tricky to be friends with someone and then try and give them pretty candid feedback, direct feedback. That can be challenging. And so I had this policy where I don't have to be friends with everyone I work with, and it's not true that I don't have friends at work. I've got friends, like lifelong friends, that I've built up at work, but equally I've got folks that I don't consider friends at all, but I have deep respect for, and I have a very professional relationship with them. But it's just that I'm not going to their house every second week for a barbecue. But we can still get on. So I think that's super important. The other thing that sprung to mind that was a bit different was that you mentioned that, Usman, and I love this. I actually wrote a blog post on this exact point last year. The point where you get promoted is the moment where you're least qualified to be that new in that new role. And it's really true from going from an engineer as an individual contributor to a manager or a leader. I wish I'd said this. I wish I'd coined this phrase. I didn't, but it's just so brilliant because I use it all the time. Management or leadership is a career change, not a promotion. And a lot of engineers really get caught up on that hump. And so what you have to do, and I coach folks with this all the time, you've got to, as an engineer, you get this sort of creative nourishment by building stuff. Okay, I mean, I love it. I love tinkering around, hacking around. But what I had to learn was that instead of getting that creative nourishment from actually doing stuff myself, I had to get it by proxy. And these days, there's like 3 or 4 levels of indirection between where the folks are actually on the keyboard typing and writing software and me, the VP. So you have to. It's a skill you have to learn or develop or craft and hone yourself. It doesn't come naturally. In fact, for some engineers, it really doesn't come at all, and they're not great. They don't make great managers, let alone leaders. So yeah,
brilliant. And I think really off the back of that point, this next question about identifying kind of other leaders on your team, so people who are demonstrating those capabilities. How do we spot them, and then what do we do? Because sometimes I've heard it, where sometimes people step up into leadership positions and then kind of their natural instinct is to look for people who have made the same steps that they have. That's kind of just natural, isn't it? But that isn't, people aren't always going to make the same steps. So kind of, I want to throw it open to you guys. How do you kind of spot other leaders, and what do you then do to empower them? Could we go to you first, please, Mel?
Yes. So equitable career development and or inclusive career development is a big passion area of mine, and I think it should be a key part in thinking about how you identify other leaders. I'm seeing, unfortunately, a lot of situations where these opportunities seem to just happen in closed doors, and not everyone is even aware that those opportunities exist. So what I do with my teams, and then what my managers do with their teams, is have a solid career plan for every individual that we refresh every 6 months, but revisit every month. And part of their career plan is to identify all the motivating factors that an individual has and what their own ambitions are. So it's really clearly stated for every individual on the team if leadership is a direction they want to go into. At Google, we're fortunate that you don't have to move into management to progress in your career. You can keep specializing and get more senior levels as an individual contributor. But we clearly articulate with every individual, what do you care about over the next 6 months? What are the main things that are driving your motivation? It could be they want a promotion. It could be they're just trying to get healthy work-life balance. And it's different for every individual. Then once the goals are really clearly stated, then the manager can play the role at looking at equitable assignment of the projects and opportunities, and just having a very intentional perspective over how you assign the work that gets handed out. And I'm a big believer in a manager looking at that consciously, not just in the work that's important, that is what I call promotable tasks, but also the non-promotable tasks. Because the unfortunate reality is that people from underrepresented groups especially women, tend to be the ones who put their hand up or get volunteered by someone else to do what I call office housework, which is the things that we need to make the team work, like birthdays and events. But it takes time, and all of that time spent is not on the things that are helping them get their leadership goal or whatever it might be. So we do equitable assignment of what we call office housework to make sure that that's fairly shared, and so that everyone's playing their part in that, and everyone gets an opportunity to do the extra stretch goals that they, tasks they might need to get to the next level.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mel. Matthew, anything to add to
that? What was the question? I was just really.
Sorry, it was about.
What was the question you were asking? Because my brain was going 1,000 miles an hour. I'm just redoing a bunch of stuff based on what Melanie just said. What was that?
Right. The question was about so identifying leaders and kind of building the right platform for them to succeed and empowering them.
Yeah. Okay. So this is back to signals. One of the things that I look out for is the ability to get out of the way. And so when we've had people that are looking like they're ready to move into what we call an engineering leader role, venture CTO type role, is are they putting the folks around them, the folks under them, into opportunities that show them at their best, right? We've by the time they're ready for promotion, we've generally seen the person who's up for promotion at their best. But what you want to do is make sure that they're recreating those opportunities for the folks around them. So that's a it's a similar thing, not quite as algorithmic as what you were saying, Melanie, or perhaps as robust as what you were saying, but it's a similar idea in that I want to what I want a leader to do is to get out of the way and let the good people that they have working for them be their best. And if they're really sort of interventionist, I know this is a style thing, so other people don't subscribe to this style. That's perfectly fine. But what I'm looking for is sort of non-interventionist leadership. Real, sort of lead. It's kind of the reverse pyramid idea. What's it called? Servant leadership. That's I think it's the technical term for it. But yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I'm looking for when we're looking for people to promote.
Excellent, thank you. And Usman, final thoughts on identifying and empowering potential leaders on your team?
Yeah, I think to begin with, I'd say that it's very organisation specific when it comes to promoting talent. And I also think that, being brutally honest, a lot of the things that we do as paper-based exercise don't eventually lead to real outcomes as well, as much as we believe that they will. And I think that's one of the more disappointing aspects of, I think, being a leader sometimes, is you have very credible individuals who 100% can do a better role, but there isn't a role for them to move into because the person in that role hasn't moved on. And I'm quite open with people that I've hired in my team in the past that sometimes it is better for them to leave and look at opportunities elsewhere for growth. That's certainly how I've navigated.
Gosh, that was awful timing, wasn't it? But I think I want to reference a few of these polls that have gone out as well, because they're kind of in line with what we're talking about now. So, what leadership skill do you value? Oh,
I'm
Usman,
back. Sorry,
you back with us? Yep. Go ahead, mate.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I do encourage sometimes people to look elsewhere where they can get better growth opportunities to kind of progress their career. I think this concept of being tied to an institution for 25 plus years isn't the way current grads kind of think, really. So you see a lot of people moving around every 12 to 18 months, and that's purely because they've reached a level and they can't kind of beat that kind of glass ceiling, if you want to call it, and so they have to look elsewhere. So I think performance ultimately does dictate whether someone has outgrown their current role and potentially has skills that might be being underutilized, not just for the benefit of them, but for the organization. And sometimes the biggest growth opportunities do come from doing things that are outside your comfort zone. I think all of us have. I think Matt mentioned before, becoming from a manager to a leader, it's a complete career change, and that's part of that kind of growth opportunity there. For me personally, it's always the best person for the job, regardless of who they are. I think it's easier said than done, but that's my kind of basic principle. But I do recognize that there's still a long way to go to remove, I guess, unconscious bias from the recruitment process, and that's something that we're all striving to do within every kind of industry. Yeah, that's just my thoughts on that particular question.
Brilliant. So yeah, I just wanted to reference some of these polls that we've been running. So, what leadership skill do you value the most? Empathy and active listening is coming out, stand out head and shoulders above everything else. Driving ambition, project planning and vision, and communication. No shocks there, really. Empathy, yeah. I think it's one of those skills where it's always seems to be at the top of the list, but very hard to quantify and almost, how do you even master something like that? Where should engineering leaders be investing the majority of their time? This one's quite tight, split between directly supporting the engineering team and managing coordination across other teams in the business. No surprises there. And biggest sign that someone is ready for leadership, audience comes in saying that they manage up effectively as being their biggest signal that somebody is ready to take the next step. Any thoughts on that one? Managing up? I think that's a good sign that someone's ready.
That's an anti-pattern for me. I'm going to be the contrarian and say if I see that kind of behavior, I start to get suspicious. Managing upward drives me nuts. So I don't know. I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to disagree with the crowd there.
That's fine. It's a discussion. The second one was mentoring someone on the team. So when someone who obviously hasn't been given that remit to mentor someone actually steps up to do that, would we say that that's a good signal?
Yeah, well, that's right. So it's about leverage. How do you get the leverage out of your team? And if you're the person is all you're doing is managing upwards, you're not getting leverage at all from the folks underneath you, right? I mean, maybe the answers there were done a bit cynically. Like maybe what the question that was actually answered was, what have you seen as an effective way to get promoted? Which may be true, but for me that would be, as I said, it's a bit of a red flag.
No worries. Well, I think we've slightly passed our 45-minute mark now, so I think we'll call it there for now. But we've managed to get through all the questions that people have posed. We did have one through from Matthew, but unfortunately we'll have to answer that in the community after this. But I just wanted to thank you all for your time. I think it's been a really great session. Lots of food for thought. Full recordings will be available immediately after this, so you will be able to see to kind of reference this in the future. Hopefully you've all had a good time, and hopefully you've all come away with something to think about as well from everyone else here. Just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for organising.
Brilliant. No worries. But yes, so for those who are still with us, thank you. Look out for that email coming through after this session, which will contain the recording. But other than that, I think it's time we said goodbye.